So Daredevil Born Again Season 1. I'm a huge fan of the Netflix original show, and so I was beyond excited when I heard that they were doing a revival. However, like a lot of other people, I became skeptical when I heard about all the behind-the-scenes drama. Is this season actually solid, or was it ruined by a bunch of behind-the-scenes drama like a lot of other Disney products? Let's find out. For reference, I've seen all of the Marvel Netflix seasons, as well as Spider-Man No Way Home and Hawkeye, but I haven't watched Echo or She-Hulk, and I know that Daredevil and or Kingpin appear in those shows, so I don't really know how those shows impacted Daredevil and Kingpin's storylines, if they did at all. Also, because this season's been out for a while, I will be spoiling the entire thing. You've been warned. Let's start with the plot. So the way that this series is structured is interesting because you can tell the original showrunners wanted to do 3 to 4 episode story arcs similar to something like Star Wars The Clone Wars. However, the new showrunners wanted it to be one continuous story similar to the original series. So while every 3 to 4 episodes there is kind of a change in the plot, there are also hints of other plot beats from previous arcs in previous story arcs, if that makes sense. And while I don't necessarily dislike the idea of doing 3 to 4 episode story arcs, especially when you consider how drawn out a lot of the Marvel Netflix shows felt, I wish that the series had really committed one way or the other. Something that this season does kind of a lot is that it seems to kind of ignore things that happened at the end of Daredevil Season 3. Like, for example, Season 3 ended with Agent Nadeem proving that Fisk was a criminal and had murdered numerous people. However, in this season, the public seems to have just kind of forgotten about that and elects him mayor of New York City somehow. There's also not really a clear explanation as to how exactly he got out of prison. I think there's like a throwaway line about like a technicality or something, but it's never really clearly explained. I also feel like this series has kind of a hard time fitting into the larger MCU. While there are some references to other MCU products, which is nice to have, it doesn't really feel consistent in terms of the setting. The audience is constantly told that New York City is unstable and that the people are panicking and that it's kind of become a chaotic place, but I never really got the sense that that was the case. That being said, I did really like that the series was able to match the kind of dark, gritty tone of the original show. It feels like it takes place in the same grounded pocket universe as the Netflix MCU. Let's talk about the first story arc, so episodes 1 through 4. This storyline deals with Matt defending a man named Hector Ayala from corrupt police officers, and it's eventually revealed that Hector Ayala is a vigilante known as the White Tiger. So let's go ahead and get the biggest spoiler out of the way. I don't necessarily mind that they killed off Foggy, but they do it in the sloppiest way possible. So the entire reason that they changed showrunners and had the big creative overhaul was because the only characters that the original showrunners were going to bring back were Murdock and Fisk. However, a big part of what made the original series so great was the interaction between Charlie Cox, Deborah Ann Woll, and Elden Henson, and the chemistry between the three characters. Fans like myself wanted more of the interaction between those three, especially when you remember that the last season ended with the three of them going to start a law firm together. However, this season does not deliver on that promise at all. So Bullseye shows up out of nowhere with no setup, kills Foggy, and then is removed from the series for a few episodes. Not only that, but they use Foggy's death as a way to get rid of Karen. The show also uses Foggy's death as a mechanism for why Matt stops being Daredevil, which the Defenders already did with Elektra's death. So like I said before, I don't necessarily mind that they killed Foggy off, but I wish we would have gotten a few episodes of Matt, Foggy, Karen working together, doing their thing before they killed Foggy off. I also want to talk about Punisher's appearance in episode 4 because honestly, it didn't really need to be there. Like a lot of fans, I was excited when they announced that John Bernthal was coming back, but he doesn't really need to be in this storyline. He doesn't serve a point in the episode, and the philosophical argument between him and Matt felt repetitive. And while I like the initial concept of Matt defending a vigilante in court from corrupt police officers, the series doesn't really do a lot with it. Its exploration of corrupt law enforcement feels very surface level. So overall, I thought the White Tiger storyline was okay, but overall it was a bit anticlimactic. It explored some interesting ideas, but didn't really go anywhere interesting. Let's talk about the second story arc, which is the standalone episode of Episode 5. Episode 5 is a standalone episode about Matt stopping a bank robbery, and while this episode isn't necessarily bad, it feels a bit unnecessary. It's the one that contributes the least to the overall story. That being said, there is some good action and some good tension. I always love scenes where Matt Murdock is able to outsmart his enemies. I thought the interaction between Matt Murdock and Miss Marvel's dad was fun, even if the Miss Marvel Easter eggs did get a little bit gratuitous. Let's talk about the third story arc, which was episodes 6 and 7. This arc deals with Matt trying to stop a serial killer named Muse. So on the positive side, I did really like the action. I thought it was really well choreographed and well shot. However, this series really wastes Muse. He comes off as just kind of a generic psychopath and doesn't really have an interesting personality or motivation. That being said, this arc does do a lot to kind of develop the relationship between Matt and Heather, which I feel like is a storyline that was actually pretty well done. And finally, let's talk about the fourth story arc, which is episodes 8 and 9. This arc deals with Fisk declaring martial law and sending his anti-vigilante task force after Daredevil. This arc introduces a mystery around Foggy's murder that kind of came out of nowhere. The first episode of this season kind of made it seem like Bullseye just killed Foggy out of revenge, but this episode kind of retcons that a little bit and says there was actually another reason why he went after the three of them. Also, the whole thing about Fisk being able to turn the public against the vigilantes really doesn't make any sense. While he can maybe turn the public against Daredevil and the Punisher, there are plenty of other vigilantes in New York City or kind of the surrounding area that the public loves, like Spider-Man, Miss Marvel, Hawkeye Kate Bishop, Swordsman, Luke Cage, etc. That being said, I absolutely loved the Punisher bits in this episode. While yes, the philosophical debates between him and Matt do feel a little bit repetitive, this is the most comic-accurate version of the Punisher we've gotten since this version of the Punisher first appeared all the way back in Daredevil Season 2. The action scene where he fights the Vigilante Task Force was awesome, and Jon Bernthal 100% commits to this role. And lastly, I'll say that even though this arc was a little bit underwhelming, it does do a good job setting up Season 2. Let's move on to the characters. Charlie Cox is, of course, great as Matt Murdock. I consider him to be one of the best live-action versions of a comic book character ever. And while his arc is okay from a writing perspective, it just feels a little bit repetitive. At the start of the series, he gives up being Daredevil because he thinks that being Daredevil put Foggy in danger and caused Foggy to die. However, over the course of the series, he slowly rediscovers all of the good that being Daredevil does and decides to embrace the Daredevil identity again. This is the exact same arc that he has in The Defenders. In The Defenders, he stopped being Daredevil because he was grieving over Elektra's death at the end of Daredevil Season 2, and over the course of The Defenders, slowly starts to embrace being Daredevil again. Vincent D'Onofrio, of course, brings his all as Wilson Fisk. He slipped right back into this role without missing a beat. He is another iconic casting that I consider to be one of the best of the best. However, I do not like his character arc at all. It is incredibly poorly defined. So at the start of the season, he kind of presents himself to the public as having redeemed, changed himself, and is pursuing becoming mayor of New York City as a way of redeeming himself. When I first watched that first episode, I thought, okay, there's two ways that this series can play this. The first is that the whole he's a changed man thing is just a facade, and that over the course of the series, the public is going to kind of slowly realize that it's just a facade, and Matt Murdock is going to have to turn the public against him. While this isn't necessarily a bad idea, it has been done before in Daredevil Season 3. Daredevil Season 3 began with Fisk getting out of prison, being moved into a penthouse, and tricking the public into believing that he'd been framed for everything. Another way that Born Again could have framed this was that Fisk had kind of tricked himself into believing that he was changed and had become a better person, and that over the course of the season, he kind of slowly admitted to himself that he's not changed, he's still a terrible person, he's still a criminal mastermind, that he can't ever truly be redeemed. And while once again this isn't necessarily a bad idea, this is exactly his arc in Season 1. At the beginning of Season 1, he kind of believes that he's a person who does morally wrong things for morally correct reasons. And over the course of Season 1, he embraces that he isn't a force for good and accepts that he's a force for evil. And I know I said this earlier in the review, but I don't get how anyone could be convinced at this point that Wilson Fisk is a changed person and has redeemed himself. In this point in the MCU timeline, he's been arrested numerous times, has been proven to have committed numerous crimes, but the series just kind of ignores all that. And the series also doesn't really explain how he managed to survive getting shot point blank by Echo at the end of Hawkeye. Overall, I kind of wish that Wilson Fisk wasn't the main villain of this season. I wish that they had developed Muse a little bit more and made him the main villain of this season. Let's move on to the side characters. So, while none of the side characters in this series are necessarily badly acted or poorly written, none of them are as memorable as the side characters in the original series. I don't even understand why they have the Detective Cherry character when the Officer Mahoney character from the original series could have served the exact same role. I particularly really dislike Michael Gandolfini's character. The character is honestly really annoying and he doesn't really serve a lot of purpose. There are two exceptions. One, I really like the character of Hector Ayala. It's nice to see kind of just a regular guy who just wants to do the right thing. The second side character I really like is Matt's new love interest, Heather. I like how she represents the people who are fooled by Fisk's bravado and falls for his lies. I want to take a second to talk about Vanessa. While I like the idea of her kind of being the one to rise to power in Wilson's absence, because this is a continuation of her arc in Daredevil Season 3, it feels so out of character that she would cheat on Wilson. So far in the series, she's been depicted as being a loving wife who's really kind of attracted to the more corrupt, sinister side of Fisk, and she's very aware that if she ever had an affair, Fisk would absolutely not let that go and would absolutely track down the person she had an affair with, and so I could never quite wrap my head around that subplot because it felt so out of character. So let's conclude. This series really is a product of bad initial decisions and some rushed attempts to fix those decisions. While there are a few bright spots, the narrative as a whole is very messy and unfocused. There are way too many plot lines, way too many characters, and none of them feel properly developed. And while I'm definitely disappointed in this season, I am still excited for Season 2, which is apparently filming currently. I'm gonna give it a mixed review. So that's it, that's my review of Daredevil Born Again. What did you guys think of Daredevil Born Again? Was it disappointing, or was it not as bad as it could have been? If you want to see my ranking of the Marvel Netflix seasons, click this link right here. Also, if you want to see more Marvel-related videos, click this playlist right here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Bye.